in some ways, affirming a person in the context of therapy is actually quite boilerplate. So, being an affirmative therapist, like if you look at, papers or guidelines around affirmative therapy, usually they start out with like a long list of definitions based on almost like Tumblr speak, right? What is gender non-binary? What is cisgender? What is heteronormativity, like genderqueer? So you're first asked to learn all of this language and what it means, which makes sense. If you have a client that's going to come in using a bunch of labels and definitions, you want to know what they're talking about. But it also is kind of saying to the clinician, use your self-reflection about your own bias. Like if you have a negative feeling towards this identity or that identity, like understand that that is an ingrained kind of heteronormative, gender normative bias. And there's a real emphasis on normalization and non-judgment. Like if a person comes in with, let's say, a non-binary gender identity that is really hard to fit into a category, the clinician is supposed to put aside their suspicions about this or their questions about this or their discomfort about this and recognize those as bias, and then just be like open to letting the client teach you in a way. So like it's very, very take a back seat, client led, and that's the foundation of these affirmative therapies.
Which is really interesting. From the 70s onwards, Carl Rogers, he's a great American psychologist, and he had a model. He had, it's called different things. Some people call it humanistic. Yeah. Some people call it person-centered. Some people call it client-centered. But Carl Rogers brought in this concept where all the therapist had to do, and it's huge in Ireland, by the way, person-centered counselling.
Yeah.
All the therapist has to do is create the right environment, and then the client will work it out. So what my job as a therapist, when I was doing my degree, it was supposed to be integrated, but it was very heavily rooted in the Carl Rogers theory, which is you just have to create this space, which is showing positive unconditional regard, showing congruence, showing kind of empathy, and being authentic. Now, authentic as well as positive unconditional regard. And, it's arguably, is it human even to be able to do that with every person that you meet? But that was the kind of the grand plan. It's really lovely. I think Carl Rogers would have been brilliant at it. I've seen enough videos of him. He could do it. And a certain therapist can do it. A huge amount of people who are listening here today will say, oh, I got one of those therapists. Because if you were to critique person-centered counselling, you would say, well, they were very, very nice. They agreed with everything. They didn't challenge me. It was a very pleasant place. And that's what he said. He said, I want to create a safe harbour. And if you create a safe harbour, the client is expert of themselves. Mm-hmm. And from there, they will have the kind of, after trauma, they will have the space to go forth and be themselves. Mm-hmm. I feel the affirmative care model is very rooted in that person-centered mentality, which is the client is expert of themselves. Even if they're having a psychotic breakdown, what we do is nod along and say yes, and we give them this empathy and positivity, and we are just almost witness. We're bearing witness.
Yeah. But I mean, yes, you're totally right. That's the root of it. But the way it has evolved is even a step further from that. There's a real activist component of the affirmative care model. Nowhere in any of the documents that I reviewed kind of in preparation for this was there like, you should remain neutral and not interject your values or opinions. In fact, it's the opposite. One thing that was remarkable, the APA put out like a guideline on working with transgender and non-binary or non-conforming people. And one of the things I thought was interesting is it said somewhere like, even if you have lesbian, gay, or bisexual clients, they may not know about the way that different gender identity labels could apply to them. So we recommend that you educate your gay, lesbian, and bisexual clients about transgender identities and how, internalized transphobia could make it possible that they don't identify as trans. So like, this is a real, almost proselytizing to people about identity.
Well, you're right, because like the affirmative didn't start with that. The affirmative was you affirm what the person comes in.
It's shifted.
It's shifted. And I used to say, they've moved from affirm to confirm, as in you give them imprimatur, you actually you confirm their identity, which I didn't think was certainly it's going outside the role of the therapist, because our role, like you said, is to be neutral, to kind of pull back and let the client work it out, and maybe ask thought-provoking questions, which now that we've gone through this creep of what is affirmative, apparently for some people, not for everybody, but for some people, they could argue, oh no, thought-provoking questions is provocative as opposed to thought-provoking. Now, I back in the day when I was studying Carl Rogers, a key kind of component of it was Socratic questioning, which is basically thought-provoking. That was a key component. While you were a presence and you were a very empathic, warm presence, your job was to provoke thought. And the affirmative is not that. It's not telling you to provoke thought. Instead, it's saying, as you said, proselytizing. It's like, actually, have you heard the latest?
Yes. Have you heard the good news about trans, identities?